I am Lorraine Evans, 35 years old, and until 5 months ago, I was the Senior Compliance Director at TechFusion Global. For 8 years, I built their compliance framework from nothing, only to be called into a conference room where the CEO's nephew told me my position was being eliminated for efficiency. I simply replied, "Understood." They never imagined my meticulous documentation would later prevent them from making an $870 million mistake. If you are watching this video, let me know where you are tuning in from. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in the power of documentation, because this story might save your career someday. My journey to TechFusion Global started long before that fateful meeting in the glass conference room. After graduating from Yale Law with honors, I specialized in corporate compliance and risk management. I had offers from prestigious firms, but I wanted to build something meaningful from the ground up, not just maintain existing systems. When I first walked into TechFusion's original office, it was barely 50 employees in a converted warehouse. The energy was electric. Jeffrey Parker, the founder and CEO, was a visionary with revolutionary ideas about integrated tech solutions, but limited understanding of the regulatory landscape his ambitions would soon encounter. "We need someone who can keep us innovative without landing us in legal trouble," Jeffrey told me during my interview. His smile was genuine, his handshake firm. "I need someone who can translate government regulations into actionable business strategies." I accepted the offer the same day. The salary was 40% less than what law firms were offering, but I received equity and something more valuable than money: the chance to create a compliance framework from scratch, tailored to a rapidly growing company. Those first years were exhilarating. I worked directly with Jeffrey and the small executive team. When I recommended compliance measures, they listened. When I raised red flags about regulatory risks, projects were modified. My voice mattered, and the company thrived partly because we balanced innovation with legal responsibility. As TechFusion grew from 50 to 500 to 5,000 employees, I built my department methodically. Each new regulation became integrated into our compliance tracking system. I created comprehensive documentation processes that became industry benchmarks. Other companies sent their compliance officers to learn our methods. My team grew too. Amanda Williams joined as my deputy in year 2. A brilliant former regulator with an encyclopedic knowledge of federal guidelines, she became my right hand and closest ally. We complemented each other perfectly, my strategic vision paired with her tactical expertise. David Harrison came aboard as CFO during year 3 of hypergrowth. Unlike many financial executives who view compliance as a cost center, David recognized its value. "Every dollar we spend on compliance saves 10 in potential penalties," he would say in budget meetings. His support was crucial when we needed resources. Sarah Jenkins joined as HR director around the same time. She walked a difficult line between executive demands and employee welfare. "Sometimes I feel like the company therapist," she confided during our weekly lunches. We formed an informal alliance, navigating the increasingly complex corporate politics together. The company culture shifted as we expanded. Jeffrey became more distant, surrounded by new executives and investors who measured success differently than in the early days. Quarterly profits overshadowed long-term sustainability. Growth at all costs became the unspoken mandate. The first warning sign came when my department's budget increase requests were denied despite our workload doubling. "Everyone needs to tighten their belts," was the explanation, even as the sales department received lavish new resources. Then I noticed my exclusion from strategic meetings where regulatory implications should have been considered. Projects would be nearly complete before my team was consulted, forcing us into reactive rather than proactive compliance. Jeffrey's nephew Ethan Parker arrived in year 7. Fresh from Harvard Business School with 0 practical experience, he was immediately appointed as Director of Strategic Initiatives. His presence at executive meetings preceded decisions that increasingly prioritized short-term gains over sustainable practices. "Compliance is important, of course," Ethan would say during meetings, "but we need to stay competitive. Some of these processes seem excessive." His dismissive tone when discussing my department became a common feature at quarterly reviews. Despite growing obstacles, I continued building our compliance infrastructure. Every potential risk was documented, every regulatory requirement tracked. I maintained detailed records of all communications where I raised concerns, not out of paranoia, but professional thoroughness. The acquisition rumors started in year 8. TechFusion had become an attractive target for larger corporations looking to absorb our technology and client base. Jeffrey began spending more time with potential buyers than with his original team. The hallways buzzed with speculation about who might purchase us and what would happen afterward. Throughout this period, I quietly strengthened our documentation systems. Each regulation we followed, each compliance measure implemented, each warning issued about potential gaps, all meticulously recorded and preserved. It was simply good professional practice, though later it would prove far more valuable than anyone could have anticipated. As acquisition talks intensified, I noticed Ethan studying our department with unusual attention. He requested detailed breakdowns of our workflows, time allocations, and decision metrics. The questions seemed aimed at quantifying our value in narrow financial terms, missing the broader risk management perspective. Just part of overall company assessment, he explained with a smile that never reached his eyes. Every department is under review for optimization opportunities. I informed David about these inquiries. His expression remained neutral, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Just provide what he asks for. Times are changing around here. That was all he would say, but the warning was clear. In response, I accelerated my documentation efforts. Every weekend, I created comprehensive summaries of our compliance coverage, regulatory relationships, and potential violation risks if certain functions were eliminated. Not because I foresaw what was coming, but because thoroughness was my professional cornerstone. Little did I know how critical this documentation would soon become, not just for me, but for the entire future of TechFusion Global. The email arrived on a Monday morning. Mandatory all-hands meeting. TechFusion Forward Initiative. The company-wide announcement was scheduled for Thursday at 9 a.m., with strict attendance requirements and instructions to clear all calendars. What do you think it means? Amanda asked, leaning against my office doorframe, coffee mug clutched tightly. Nothing good comes from meetings with inspirational names, I replied, attempting lightness despite the uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. The Grand Conference Center was filled to capacity that Thursday. Every employee from headquarters plus video links to our satellite offices worldwide. The executive team filed onto the stage, Jeffrey front and center, Ethan one step behind him. I noticed David and Sarah exchanging glances, their expressions carefully blank. Today marks the beginning of an exciting new chapter for TechFusion Global, Jeffrey began, his practiced enthusiasm not quite reaching his eyes. As we position ourselves for the next decade of innovation, we need to optimize our organizational structure for maximum efficiency and agility. He then introduced Ethan, who launched into a slick presentation filled with colorful charts and business school jargon. Strategic optimization, resource allocation efficiency, streamlined operational matrices. The words washed over the audience, impressive sounding but intentionally vague. My attention sharpened when the organizational charts appeared on screen. Marketing, sales, product development, engineering, all prominently featured with slightly modified structures. But compliance was conspicuously absent from the future state diagrams, not reduced or restructured, simply gone. During the question period, I raised my hand. Jeffrey called on others until time constraints made further inquiries impossible. My unasked question hung in the air as employees filed out, a buzz of confusion and anxiety filling the hallways. I caught David by the elevator, away from prying ears. The charts did not include compliance. What does that mean for my department? His eyes darted to check who might be listening. Nothing is finalized, he said quietly. But prepare for significant changes. That is all I can say. The weeks that followed were filled with mounting tension. Teams of consultants appeared, huddling with executives behind closed doors. They requested unusual information from various departments, asking pointed questions about workflow redundancies and regulatory minimums. My team reported being pulled into strange interviews about our daily activities. They asked how much of our work is automated versus manual, Amanda told me, and whether our processes could be handled by artificial intelligence or outsourced overseas. I requested meetings with Jeffrey to discuss compliance implications. His assistant offered dates weeks in the future. I emailed detailed concerns about regulatory requirements. The responses were brief acknowledgments without substance. Then Amanda discovered something alarming. She had been helping the IT department with a system update when she glimpsed an open spreadsheet on a manager's screen. Lorraine, they had a list of our entire department. Everyone was marked as redundant overhead with salary figures and termination cost estimates. That night, I stayed until midnight, initiating what I called my emergency documentation sprint. I organized 8 years of compliance records, created simplified guides to our most critical processes, and compiled a comprehensive risk assessment highlighting the federal violations the company might face without proper compliance oversight. Why are we doing this? Amanda asked as she helped me organize digital archives late into the evening. Because information is protection, I answered. Whatever happens, we need to ensure these records are preserved and comprehensible. The restructuring teams began interviewing employees individually. Each day, colleagues would disappear into conference rooms and return looking shaken. Some emerged with forced smiles and vague explanations about exciting new responsibilities. Others returned to silently pack their belongings, security personnel hovering nearby. I organized a final dinner with my compliance team at a restaurant far from headquarters. Without directly violating confidentiality, I gave them the best advice I could. Document everything, I told them as we shared dessert. Keep records of all your warnings, all your work, all the value you add, not just for the company, but for yourselves. They exchanged confused glances, not yet understanding the storm on the horizon. I wished I could be more explicit, but professional ethics prevented me from sharing my suspicions directly. The following Tuesday, an unexpected calendar invitation appeared on my schedule. Organizational alignment discussion with Ethan Parker, Sarah from HR, and Gregory Wilson, outside legal counsel. The meeting was set for 9 a.m. the next day. They scheduled the same meeting for me at 11, Amanda whispered when she saw my calendar. Her eyes were wide with understanding of what this likely meant. That night, I backed up key documentation to my personal devices, careful to include only materials I had created and nothing containing proprietary information. It was a precautionary measure that walked the fine line of professional ethics, including only content that documented my own work performance and compliance recommendations. I selected my most professional outfit the next morning. Navy blue suit, minimal jewelry, hair neatly arranged. If this was to be my last day at TechFusion, I would face it with dignity. The documentation of 8 years of work was organized and ready for transition. Whatever happened in that meeting, I would be prepared. It is time, I thought as the elevator carried me up to the executive floor. Let's see what kind of efficiency they have in mind. The conference room on the executive floor featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. On any other day, I might have appreciated the view. Today, it merely provided a dramatic backdrop for what was about to unfold. Ethan sat at the head of the table, a leather portfolio open before him. Sarah from HR occupied the chair to his right, her expression professionally neutral but eyes avoiding mine. Gregory Wilson, the outside counsel, sat opposite Sarah, his presence signaling this was not a routine meeting. Lorraine, thank you for joining us, Ethan began, his rehearsed tone suggesting this was not his first such conversation today. As you know, TechFusion is implementing strategic changes to streamline operations and optimize our organizational structure. I remained silent, hands folded on the table, face composed despite my racing heart. After extensive analysis of company needs and functional requirements, he continued, we have determined that certain positions need to be eliminated to remove redundancies and improve operational efficiency. The corporate euphemisms hung in the air between us. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I regret to inform you that your position as Senior Compliance Director is being eliminated, effective immediately. There it was. 8 years of building something from nothing, dismissed as a redundancy. I felt a curious detachment, as though watching the scene from above rather than living it. The compliance function will be redistributed among several departments, with automated solutions handling much of the regulatory tracking. Our analysis shows this will generate significant cost savings while maintaining adequate coverage of essential requirements. Adequate coverage. Essential requirements. The phrases sent warning signals flaring through my professional brain, but I maintained my composed exterior. "We have prepared a severance package," Sarah interjected, sliding a folder toward me. 2 months of salary continuation, benefits coverage through the end of the quarter, and outplacement services. 2 months for 8 years of service. The inadequacy of the offer might have been laughable if it were not so insulting. "We will need you to sign these documents acknowledging receipt of the severance offer and confirming your compliance with confidentiality obligations," Gregory added, pushing additional papers across the table. I took a slow breath before responding. "Understood." The simplicity of my response seemed to throw them. Perhaps they had expected tears, anger, or desperate negotiation. "We will need you to transition any critical information before departing today," Ethan continued. "Your files, passwords, and any ongoing projects should be documented for handover." "Of course," I replied evenly. "I have prepared comprehensive transition materials anticipating organizational changes. However, I should note that our compliance tracking system is extremely complex, developed over 8 years to address evolving federal regulations." I opened my laptop, turning it toward them to display the intricate compliance dashboard my team had built. This system monitors 17 different regulatory frameworks across 12 federal agencies. Each framework requires specialized knowledge and dedicated oversight. Scrolling through screens of data, I continued. These monitoring processes are necessary for compliance with Section 43.6 of the Federal Trade Commission Guidelines, which explicitly requires dedicated personnel with appropriate credentials to maintain regulatory alignment. Gregory leaned forward with sudden interest, but Ethan cut me off with a dismissive wave. "We are implementing a more efficient automated system to replace these manual processes," he stated confidently. "Our consultants assure us that artificial intelligence solutions can handle these requirements at a fraction of the cost." I nodded, closing my laptop. I have documented my professional assessment of that approach in my transition materials, including specific regulatory citations requiring human oversight. Sarah glanced at her watch. "We have your company laptop and phone on the list for collection. Is there anything else you need to retrieve from your office?" "My personal items are minimal. I can collect them quickly." The remaining process was clinical and swift. I signed acknowledgement of the severance offer, not acceptance, buying time to review the terms. Sarah collected my company credit card, building access badge, and parking permit. Gregory observed silently, making occasional notes. "Security will escort you to your office and then to the exit," Sarah explained, unable to meet my eyes. "Standard procedure for all departing executives." The security officer waiting outside was Jack, who had checked my badge every morning for 7 years. His expression showed discomfort at his assigned task. "Sorry about this, Miss Evans," he muttered as we walked to the elevator. "Not your fault, Jack," I assured him quietly. The walk through the open office area was deliberately humiliating, designed to make an example. Employees glanced up from monitors, quickly looking away when they realized what was happening. A compliance executive being escorted out by security sent a powerful message to anyone considering objection to the restructuring. At my office, I efficiently collected photographs and personal items into a cardboard box provided by security. 8 years reduced to a single container. I deliberately left behind physical copies of my transition documents, risk assessments, and compliance warnings on the desk, each clearly labeled. As we passed the compliance department, I saw Amanda through the glass wall of her office. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror as she registered the box in my arms and the security escort. I gave her the smallest nod, an unspoken message to remember my advice about documentation. The elevator ride to the lobby was silent. In the parking garage, Jack hesitated before his final duty. "I need your badge, Miss Evans," he said apologetically. I handed it over, suddenly feeling the finality of the moment. "Take care of yourself, Jack. You too, Miss Evans. This place will not be the same without you." Sitting in my car, I placed the box on the passenger's seat and gripped the steering wheel. My hands were shaking too much to insert the key into the ignition. The professional facade I had maintained cracked, and tears blurred my vision. 8 years of my professional life had just ended in a 30-minute meeting with people who fundamentally misunderstood the value of what I had built. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of emotional release before wiping my eyes, starting the car, and driving away from TechFusion Global for what I believed would be the last time. I was wrong about that. I would return, but under circumstances none of us could have predicted that day. The first week after termination passed in a blur of shock and disbelief. I moved between my bed and couch, barely eating, sleeping at odd hours, and ignoring calls from concerned friends. My identity had been so intertwined with my role at TechFusion that its sudden absence left me adrift. Each morning I woke with momentary confusion about why I was not preparing for work, followed by the crushing remembrance of reality. The betrayal cut deeper than the job loss itself. 8 years of dedication dismissed as unnecessary overhead. On day 9, my phone rang at 11:30 at night. Amanda's name flashed on the screen. "Lorraine? Are you okay? I have been trying to reach you for days." Her voice was tense, hushed. "I am surviving," I answered truthfully. "What is happening there?" "They eliminated the entire department," she said. "Everyone is gone. Even the compliance analysts who have been here since the beginning." My stomach tightened. Who is handling the regulatory requirements? They split basic functions among different departments. Junior legal associates are handling federal filing deadlines. IT is running the automated monitoring systems. Nobody has the complete picture anymore. "That cannot possibly work," I said, professional concern temporarily overriding personal distress. "It is not," Amanda confirmed. "The system flagged 3 potential violations last week that nobody knew how to interpret. They marked them as low priority and moved on." After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling, troubled not just for myself, but for the company I had helped build. Without proper compliance oversight, TechFusion was operating with significant regulatory risk. However, that was no longer my responsibility. Reality set in during week 3. Mortgage payment due. Health insurance coverage ending soon. Savings substantial but not infinite. The severance offer remained unsigned on my dining table as I consulted with an employment attorney about its terms. "This is below industry standard for someone at your level and tenure," she advised. "We could push back, but litigation would be lengthy and potentially damage your reputation in the industry." I signed the paperwork, choosing financial stability over principle. The practical concerns of survival demanded precedence over justice. The job search presented unexpected challenges. My credentials and experience generated interest, but interviews revealed unspoken obstacles. "Your compliance framework at TechFusion was impressive," one interviewer commented, "but we are looking for someone more aligned with our growth-oriented culture." Sometimes compliance can be seen as saying no too often. Translation: they wanted someone who would bend rules to accommodate business objectives. My reputation for regulatory adherence worked against me. Another potential employer was more direct. "Frankly, we could hire 2 junior compliance officers for your salary requirement. With automation tools improving, we are rethinking the seniority level for this position." The industry was following TechFusion's lead, devaluing specialized compliance expertise in favor of cheaper, less experienced alternatives. It was short-sighted and dangerous. but explaining that during interviews only reinforced the perception that I was inflexible. By month 2, financial pressure forced me to accept small consulting gigs, reviewing contracts and compliance documentation for startups. The work was piecemeal and paid a fraction of my former salary, but it covered essential bills while I continued searching for permanent positions. A breakthrough came unexpectedly. Thomas Blackwell, a Yale Law classmate now at a prestigious firm, reached out after seeing my updated LinkedIn profile. "We occasionally need specialized compliance review for clients in regulated industries," he explained over coffee. "The work is freelance and project-based, but the rates are competitive. Would that interest you while you are searching?" I accepted gratefully. The first assignment, reviewing a pharmaceutical company's marketing materials for regulatory compliance, reminded me of my professional value. My detailed analysis identified several potential FDA violations that could have resulted in significant penalties. "This is exceptional work," Thomas said when I submitted my report. "The client asked if you would be available for ongoing consultations." Gradually, my professional identity rebuilt itself around this new independent role. Rather than compliance director for one company, I became a specialized advisor to many. My phone began ringing with referrals. Former colleagues from TechFusion, also displaced by the restructuring, reached out for collaboration on projects. 4 months after my termination, I attended an industry networking event, my first since leaving TechFusion. The confidence that had abandoned me in those early weeks had returned, bolstered by successful consulting engagements and positive client feedback. Standing near the bar, I overheard a conversation between two executives. TechFusion is being acquired by NexaCorp. The deal is valued at $870 million. Announcement expected next week. My hand froze midway to my glass. NexaCorp was the industry giant, known for aggressive expansion but also stringent due diligence, particularly regarding regulatory compliance. Their legal team had a reputation for thoroughness that bordered on obsessive. Apparently, they want TechFusion's client base and proprietary algorithms, the conversation continued. The integration teams are already working on transition plans. Later that evening, I searched for news articles confirming the rumor. A business journal had published preliminary details. TechFusion Global in advanced acquisition talks with NexaCorp. Sources say deal valued at $870 million. The article included a quote from Jeffrey. "We have positioned TechFusion for optimal efficiency and regulatory alignment, making us an attractive acquisition target." Regulatory alignment. The phrase jumped out at me. Having dismantled the compliance department, how could he possibly make such a claim? Reading the detailed acquisition outline, I spotted several statements that contradicted what I knew about TechFusion's current compliance status. Claims about robust regulatory frameworks and comprehensive compliance documentation seemed disconnected from the reality Amanda had described. I felt an ethical dilemma forming. My professional integrity demanded concern about potentially false representations, yet I had no official standing or obligation to intervene. TechFusion's compliance gaps were no longer my responsibility. Then a notification appeared in my inbox that would change everything. Meeting request. Catherine Lawson, Chief Legal Officer, NexaCorp Due Diligence Team. The subject line read, "Consultation regarding TechFusion Global Compliance Structures." The pieces suddenly connected. NexaCorp's legal team had found my name on years of compliance documentation and wanted insight into the systems I had built. What they did not yet know was that those systems no longer existed. The business news channels could discuss nothing else that week. TechFusion Global Acquisition by NexaCorp. Industry-changing deal flashed across screens in airport lounges, hotel lobbies, and financial district cafes. Stock analysts debated the $870 million valuation, generally agreeing that NexaCorp was making a strategic move to acquire TechFusion's artificial intelligence algorithms and established client relationships. I watched these discussions with growing unease. Having spent 8 years building TechFusion's compliance framework, I understood the regulatory requirements their products faced. The public statements about the acquisition mentioned nothing about compliance integration or regulatory risk assessment. When Catherine Lawson's email arrived requesting a consultation, I faced an ethical crossroads. My professional obligation was to provide honest information if I chose to engage, but nothing required me to participate in the process. I could simply decline and allow events to unfold without my input. After careful consideration and consultation with my attorney, I agreed to meet. My decision was guided by professional ethics rather than any desire for vindication. If asked direct questions about TechFusion's compliance systems, I would answer truthfully, but without volunteering information beyond the specific queries. Catherine Lawson chose a private conference room at her firm's offices for our meeting. She was a commanding presence, impeccably dressed, with the sharp focus of someone who had conducted countless high-stakes negotiations. "Thank you for meeting with us, Miss Evans," she began, gesturing to two colleagues flanking her. "This is James Chen, our regulatory compliance specialist, and Alexis Morgan, who leads our acquisition risk assessment team." I nodded acknowledgement, maintaining a neutral expression. "During our due diligence process for the TechFusion acquisition, we noticed your signature on virtually all their compliance documentation filed with regulatory agencies over the past 8 years," Catherine continued. "However, when we requested meetings with the current compliance leadership, we were directed to various department heads and junior legal staff." She slid several documents across the table, copies of federal filings I had prepared and signed. "These filings indicate sophisticated compliance mechanisms that we have not been able to locate in our review. We were hoping you could provide clarity on these systems." The question was direct and professional. I could answer factually without breaching any confidentiality obligations. "I designed and implemented TechFusion's compliance framework over my 8-year tenure as Senior Compliance Director," I explained. "The documentation you have reflects the systems as they existed during that time." "And when did your tenure end?" James asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. 5 months ago. My position was eliminated during a restructuring initiative focused on operational efficiency." Catherine and her colleagues exchanged glances. "Was your departure part of a larger reorganization of the compliance function?" Alexis inquired. "The entire compliance department was eliminated," I stated simply. "The functions were distributed among various departments as part of a streamlining initiative." Catherine leaned forward. "Distributed how exactly?" I described the structure Amanda had outlined. Junior legal associates handling federal filings, IT managing automated monitoring systems, departmental managers assuming responsibility for compliance within their divisions. I carefully restricted my comments to factual information about organizational changes without offering opinions on their effectiveness. "These federal regulations," Catherine said, pointing to specific sections in the documents, require dedicated compliance personnel with appropriate credentials. "How is TechFusion meeting these requirements without a compliance department?" "I cannot speak to their current approach," I replied. "My knowledge ends with my employment." "But you designed these systems," James pressed. "In your professional assessment, could these regulatory requirements be adequately addressed through the distributed approach you just described?" The question touched the core of my ethical dilemma. I could not lie about professional standards, yet I did not want to unnecessarily damage TechFusion. The systems I designed required specialized expertise to interpret regulatory signals and coordinate appropriate responses, I answered carefully. "Certain federal regulations explicitly require designated compliance officers with specific credentials to certify adherence. These requirements are outlined in the documentation I provided during my transition." Catherine made a note. "Do you have copies of that transition documentation?" "I retained copies of materials I personally created that document my professional work product," I confirmed. "I did not keep any proprietary company information." This was the critical distinction that allowed me to share certain documents without violating confidentiality obligations. My attorney had confirmed that documentation of my own professional assessments and recommendations remained my intellectual property. I provided copies of my transition materials, risk assessments, and specific regulatory requirement documentation. These included my written warnings about compliance gaps that would arise if specialized oversight was eliminated. As Catherine and her team reviewed these materials, their expressions grew increasingly concerned. James began flagging specific pages, whispering to Catherine, who nodded with growing intensity. "These compliance requirements are not optional suggestions," Catherine noted. "They are legally binding obligations that carry significant penalties for violations." "That was my understanding," I replied neutrally. "And based on what you have told us about the elimination of dedicated compliance personnel, TechFusion appears to be operating without required regulatory safeguards." I did not confirm or deny this assessment, maintaining professional distance while allowing them to draw their own conclusions. Our meeting extended for 3 hours, as they requested specific clarification about regulatory requirements, documentation procedures, and compliance systems I had designed. I answered factually and precisely, neither embellishing nor withholding relevant information. 2 days later, Business News reported unexpected complications in the TechFusion acquisition timeline. NexaCorp had dispatched an expanded due diligence team to TechFusion headquarters for additional verification procedures. The announcement triggered a 4% drop in TechFusion's stock price. Amanda called that evening, voice hushed and tense. NexaCorp auditors are everywhere, demanding access to compliance documentation and regulatory correspondence. Jeffrey is furious, blaming the legal department for not being prepared. "What is happening, Lorraine?" "Due diligence," I replied simply. "Standard procedure for acquisitions of this magnitude. They keep asking about compliance systems you designed. They have copies of reports with your signature and want to see the current versions. The problem is, there are no current versions. We stopped generating those reports when the department was eliminated." I felt simultaneous concern from my former colleagues caught in this situation and vindication that the importance of our work was finally being recognized. "What should I tell them?" Amanda asked desperately. "Tell the truth," I advised. "Professional integrity requires nothing less, nothing more." The following week brought increasingly alarming headlines. NexaCorp expands due diligence of TechFusion. Acquisition timeline extended. TechFusion shares fall 12% amid acquisition uncertainty. Sources report regulatory compliance issues complicating TechFusion deal. I maintain my distance, continuing to focus on rebuilding my consulting practice. Yet each news alert about the unraveling deal sent conflicting emotions through me. The professional in me was troubled by the compliance failures my former employer now faced. The human in me could not help feeling a measure of satisfaction that the value of my work was being validated, albeit in a painful way. Catherine Lawson called again, requesting a follow-up consultation. "We have identified significant compliance gaps that directly contradict representations made by TechFusion executives during acquisition negotiations," she explained. "As the architect of their previous compliance systems, your perspective would be valuable in our final assessment." I agreed to one more meeting, reaffirming my commitment to factual, professional information without personal bias. Whatever happened next would be the result of TechFusion's decisions, not my actions. I had simply told the truth when directly asked. Sometimes, that was enough to change everything. The news alert flashed across my phone at 9:16 in the morning. Breaking. NexaCorp terminates $870M TechFusion acquisition citing regulatory concerns. Within minutes, financial channels erupted with analysis and speculation. TechFusion stock plummeted 40% in the first hour of trading, triggering temporary circuit breakers. Market commentators described it as one of the most dramatic acquisition collapses in recent tech history. Amanda texted me from inside TechFusion headquarters. "Emergency board meeting called. Executives running around like the building is on fire. What did you tell NexaCorp?" "Only the truth," I replied. "Nothing more, nothing less." The official press release from NexaCorp was diplomatic but unmistakable in its implications. Following comprehensive due diligence, NexaCorp has identified regulatory compliance concerns that preclude the completion of the proposed acquisition. These concerns represent potential material risks that were not adequately disclosed during initial negotiations. Jeffrey Parker issued a terse statement expressing disappointment with NexaCorp's unexpected decision and assuring investors that TechFusion remains committed to innovation and growth as an independent company. The market's response suggested few found this reassurance convincing. Amanda's text provided real-time updates from inside the company. Board members arrived looking grim. Jeffrey and Ethan trying to explain what happened. NexaCorp's legal team presenting findings to the board. They have copies of your compliance documentation and transition warnings. Board member just asked why your warnings about compliance requirements were ignored. Ethan claiming your concerns were exaggerated to protect your department. I could visualize the scene. The boardroom where I had presented compliance updates dozens of times, now filled with angry board members demanding explanations for a catastrophic failure that had slashed the company's value overnight. Catherine Lawson would be there, methodically presenting the evidence her team had uncovered. The precise, damning comparison between the compliance systems I had built and the inadequate replacements implemented after my departure. The specific regulatory requirements being violated. The potential federal penalties exceeding $200 million. Amanda's updates continued. Catherine Lawson just told the board that eliminating the compliance department created immediate federal violations that made acquisition toxic to any informed buyer. She literally cited the exact warnings in your transition document. Ethan, trying to claim this is sabotage by a disgruntled former employee. Board members shut him down, pointing out these are federal requirements, not your personal opinions. Jeffrey facing serious questions about his leadership. Major investors demanding explanation for how $870 million in value evaporated overnight. I felt no joy in these developments, only a complex mixture of professional vindication and genuine concern for the company I had helped build. Hundreds of innocent employees would face uncertainty and potential job loss because leadership had devalued critical compliance functions. Late that afternoon, my phone rang with a number I recognized. TechFusion's General Counsel, William Foster. Lorraine, he began without preamble. We need to talk. I am listening, I replied neutrally. The board has been briefed on the compliance gaps that derailed the NexaCorp acquisition. They have reviewed your transition documentation and the warnings you provided before your departure. He paused, and I heard the sound of papers shuffling. They have instructed me to reach out regarding potential consulting services to address these gaps immediately. The situation is, frankly, urgent. The irony was almost too perfect. The same company that had deemed my role redundant now faced an existential crisis because of that decision. I would need to consider any such arrangement carefully, I responded. My schedule is quite full with existing client commitments. This was partially true, but also a necessary negotiating stance. If TechFusion wanted my expertise now, they would need to recognize its value appropriately. The board has authorized me to offer whatever terms would be necessary to secure your assistance, William continued, desperation evident in his voice. Regulatory agencies are already asking questions following the acquisition collapse. We need someone who understands our compliance history and requirements. I will review my availability and be in touch tomorrow, I said, deliberately noncommittal. After ending the call, I sat in my home office, staring at the view of the city skyline. The emotional complexity of the situation was overwhelming. Part of me wanted nothing to do with the company that had discarded me and my team so casually. Another part felt professional responsibility toward the organization and colleagues who were not responsible for leadership's poor decisions. That evening, I called my former mentor from law school, Professor Eleanor Winters, who had guided my early career. They need you more than you need them, she observed after I explained the situation. That gives you power to set terms that ensure this does not happen again. Is it wrong to feel satisfied that they are facing consequences for ignoring warnings I provided? I asked. Not at all, she replied. But the true professional separates that personal satisfaction from the decisions they make next. What serves your longer-term goals and values? That is the question to consider. I spent the night drafting conditions under which I would consider assisting TechFusion. By morning, I had clarity about my path forward, balancing professional ethics with appropriate boundaries. I called William back with my decision. I am prepared to offer consulting services under specific conditions, I told him. First, I require direct board access and reporting. Second, Amanda Williams must be reinstated as compliance director with appropriate authority and budget. Third, I will need written acknowledgement of the compliance framework requirements I previously documented. The board will accept these terms, William replied without hesitation. How soon can you start? I will begin Monday, I said. Send the contract to my attorney for review today. As I prepared to re-engage with TechFusion, news continued breaking about the fallout. Shareholder lawsuits were being filed. Regulatory agencies had opened investigations. The company's future hung in balance. Yet, amid the chaos, I felt a strange sense of purpose. The path ahead would be challenging, but it offered an opportunity to rebuild something important, this time with proper recognition of its value. The mistakes made by TechFusion's leadership had cost them $870 million and potentially much more in regulatory penalties and market value. It was an expensive lesson about the true meaning of efficiency and the hidden costs of eliminating essential functions. As Amanda texted later, they thought they were cutting costs by eliminating compliance. Instead, they learned compliance is not a cost center, but an insurance policy. And they just experienced what happens when you let that policy lapse. Walking back into TechFusion headquarters felt surreal. The same security desk, the same elevators, but everything fundamentally changed. Jack, the security guard, broke into a wide smile when he saw me. Miss Evans, welcome back. They sure need you around here. Thank you, Jack. It is good to see you too. The receptionist issued me a visitor badge with special consultant printed beneath my name. The symbolism was not lost on me. I was simultaneously an insider with deep institutional knowledge and an outsider with newfound independence. The board meeting room was filled to capacity when I arrived. Board members I had rarely seen during my tenure now sat attentively, faces grave. Jeffrey occupied his usual seat at the head of the table, but his confident posture was replaced by a defensive hunch. Ethan was notably absent. Thank you for joining us, Miss Evans, the board chair began. Recent events have highlighted critical gaps in our regulatory compliance framework. We have asked you here to help us understand and address these issues. For the next 2 hours, I methodically outlined the compliance requirements TechFusion faced, the systems I had built to address them, and the specific deficiencies created by eliminating dedicated compliance oversight. I presented facts without accusation, focusing on solutions rather than blame. Rebuilding proper compliance will require dedicated personnel, appropriate authority, and integration across all business functions, I concluded. It cannot be treated as optional or secondary to other priorities. The questions that followed revealed a board suddenly educated about regulatory requirements they had previously ignored. The dismissive attitudes toward compliance had vanished, replaced by urgent concern about federal penalties and shareholder lawsuits. Over the following weeks, I worked closely with Amanda, reinstated as compliance director with expanded authority and budget. We methodically reconstructed the systems that had been dismantled, updated documentation, and addressed the most critical compliance gaps. The company town hall announcing these changes was a stark contrast to the restructuring presentation months earlier. Jeffrey, humbled by recent events, spoke without his usual bravado. We made a serious error in judgment by undervaluing our compliance functions, he admitted to employees. That mistake cost us the NexaCorp acquisition and exposed us to significant regulatory risk. We are committed to correcting this error and rebuilding a stronger company with proper compliance integration. He then announced Ethan's departure to pursue other opportunities, corporate speak for a forced resignation. The barely disguised relief on employees' faces spoke volumes about Ethan's impact on company culture. As word spread through the industry about TechFusion's compliance crisis and subsequent rebuilding efforts. I received inquiries from other companies seeking guidance on their own regulatory frameworks. My consulting practice expanded beyond what I could personally handle, leading me to bring on former compliance colleagues as associates. 6 months after the collapsed acquisition, TechFusion stock had recovered much of its loss. The compliance department under Amanda's leadership had become a respected voice in corporate decision-making. New products underwent regulatory review during development rather than as an afterthought. Jeffrey asked to meet privately one afternoon. The arrogance that had characterized his leadership was gone, replaced by hard-earned wisdom. "I owe you an apology, Lorraine," he began. "We dismissed your expertise as unnecessary cost. That decision nearly destroyed everything we built." "What matters is that the mistake was corrected," I replied. "At enormous cost," he acknowledged ruefully. $870 million, plus regulatory penalties, plus legal fees and stock devaluation. It turns out compliance was quite cost-effective after all. He slid a folder across the desk. "The board has authorized me to offer you the position of Chief Compliance Officer, reporting directly to them with Executive Committee membership. The compensation package reflects our new understanding of the role's importance." I glanced at the offer, noting a salary nearly double my previous compensation, plus equity and authority guarantees. "I appreciate the offer, Jeffrey, but I have discovered something important about myself these past months. I am more effective as an independent advisor than as an employee." His disappointment was evident, but he nodded understanding. "Your consulting contract remains in place as long as you are willing, and I hope you know your guidance has fundamentally changed how I view leadership." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The humiliation of being escorted from the building had transformed into professional respect and new opportunities I could never have anticipated. My consulting firm, Evans Compliance Advisors, now served clients across multiple industries. I worked with companies proactively seeking to strengthen their regulatory frameworks rather than fighting to be heard within a single organization. The most important lesson I shared with clients came from TechFusion's expensive mistake. True efficiency is not about eliminating functions that appear as costs on a spreadsheet. It requires understanding the value those functions provide, often in risk prevention that becomes visible only when protections are removed. TechFusion had paid $870 million to learn that compliance is not bureaucratic overhead, but essential risk management. My detailed documentation had ultimately protected the company from even worse consequences by providing a roadmap back to regulatory alignment. For those watching this story unfold, I hope it offers perspective on valuing expertise and respecting established processes before dismantling them. Sometimes the most important functions in an organization are those preventing problems you never see, precisely because they are doing their job effectively. Has your expertise ever been undervalued, only to be proven essential later? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might be facing similar challenges in their professional lives. Your support helps bring these important lessons to those who need them most. Thank you for joining me on this journey of professional resilience and vindication. Remember that your value does not diminish simply because someone fails to recognize it.